Are you kidding me? 30 days to vacate or they'll demolish it? I spent 5 years building this cabin with my bare hands. Every foundation stone, every roof beam, every window frame mine. Now some power-hungry woman claiming to represent a HOA wants to steal it, says my own property doesn't belong to me anymore. The rage burning in my chest could have melted steel that day, I swear. This is America, not some authoritarian nightmare. You ever get that feeling like something you worked your whole life for can just be snatched away? Comment below what state you're in, because I'm telling you this insanity is spreading everywhere, and your home could be next. That morning I was standing on the front porch of my cabin, a chipped coffee mug warming my hands, the air crisp with that particular October edge. I looked out over what 5 years of relentless determination had created. Every single thing you see, my sweat, my plans, my calloused hands. The foundation stones I hauled up from Morrison's quarry myself. The log walls I lifted and stacked one beam at a time, the metal roof catching the dawn like armor. Not one contractor, not one outsider, I built about 200 square feet of pure independence. Off-grid solar well water, a backup generator, all tucked into 12 acres I owned, free and clear, no bank could touch it. This place wasn't just a house. It was a declaration mine bought and paid for. My days settled into a kind of ritual. First light, I'd check the solar panels, walk the fence line, test the generator. Sometimes, just for the hell of it, I'd open my fireproof safe and look over the deed, the stack of permits and inspection certificates and receipts, every scrap of paper you need to prove a man still has a right to carve out a life on his own terms. Those papers were my armor, my guarantee this place was legitimate. You know, proof that if you work hard and keep your head down, you can still make something permanent in this country. Inside, the photographs on my walls told the whole story. Me breaking ground in April 2019. Foundation pour in muddy jeans frame rising against blue summer skies. The roof going on just before the first snow. I'd taken a picture at every step, mostly because I couldn't quite believe I was pulling it off. There's something about looking back at the process, how every inch represents not just work, but all those late nights you sit on a pile of lumber wondering if you're actually building something real. This cabin wasn't just a structure, it was everything I believed about liberty and personal responsibility and the right to shape your own destiny. Maybe that's why when I did my usual perimeter check that October morning, I felt the hair stand up on my arms. Something was wrong. Over by the eastern boundary where my land meets the county road, I saw fresh tire tracks, deep grooves cut into earth that should have been untouched. Not just a car, these were heavy, wide overlapping in a way that said someone spent real time here. The tracks led right through the brush to a line of bright orange surveyor's flags, each one staked with professional precision. Brand new nylon driven deep, and from the way they lined up, laser gear had been used. I could see tripod impressions at 3 points classic setup for boundary mapping, and it all stunk of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I walked those flags, heart pounding. The survey was perfect, following every corner, every marker, every detail of my land, except for one thing. I hadn't hired a surveyor. My boundaries were set and confirmed when I bought this land, signed by the county, backed by the title company, Ironclad. So who the hell did this? I spent the rest of that morning circling my own property, feeling watched. Feeling like I'd woken up in someone else's life. Those flags, that careful measurement, they weren't just trespassing, they were an invasion, a claim. By noon, my phone rang, unknown number, local code. Mr. Thompson, this is regarding construction activity on your property at Blackberry Ridge Road. We need to discuss some compliance issues with you. The voice was smooth, official, but something about it put me on edge. Who exactly is this? I said real slow. What agency are you calling from? But they dodged, just repeated, we'll be in touch to schedule a meeting, and hung up. 30 seconds, that's all, but it left a hollow in my gut. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I pulled out every document I owned, spread them across the kitchen table, deed survey maps, tax records, permits, inspection slips. Everything was flawless. If the county wanted a survey, I'd have known. If a private outfit wanted access, they'd need my signature. So who had this kind of authority? Who could just roll in and measure what I'd worked so hard for? That evening, standing on my porch, the sun setting behind the oaks I'd left standing for shade, I felt the weight of every battle I'd fought to build this place, permits, inspectors, the endless hoops. But this, whatever it was, felt like something else. Someone with real resources had surveyed my land, and now I was getting mysterious calls about compliance. What compliance? I'd played by every rule. Back inside, the photos on the mantle looked different. Not like memories, like evidence in a trial I hadn't agreed to. The whole cabin, the proof of my life's work, now felt threatened. For the first time since I'd broken ground, I wondered how safe is a man really in the country he thinks he understands. The next morning at exactly 9, I heard footsteps on my gravel drive. 3 people in dark suits, the woman up front moving like someone used to getting her way. She introduced herself as Deborah Foster, chairwoman of the Blackberry Ridge HOA. Never heard of her. She handed me a map, said my property was inside their community management district, that the whole area was under new oversight for property value protection. The 2 men with her moved around my yard, snapping photos, measuring every corner, writing things down on clipboards like they were at a crime scene. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Ma'am, this is private land. I never joined any HOA." She didn't blink, just handed me a thick folder pointing to a county seal. "Your construction activities are within our designated management area. We have inspection authority." She flashed a document with a photocopied signature, blurred seal, and most damning, an authorization date 6 months before their HOA even existed. I called the county on my cell right there. The clerk put me on hold, came back and said, "No, sir, your permits are current and there's no HOA authority in your area." I repeated that, looking Deborah right in the eye. She never flinched. "County staff aren't always aware of community management nuances," she said, so smooth it made my skin crawl. Her men had finished their work, and Deborah gave me an ultimatum: 30 days to transfer the property to community ownership or remove the structure at your expense. After that, the association will take necessary steps to secure our property. She left a business card with gold letters and that same pitiless smile: "Consult legal counsel." Then she and her crew drove off, leaving me standing on the porch of the home I'd built, holding a folder full of fakes. Back inside, I compared their documents to mine: real signatures, real seals, consistent dates versus their photocopies and contradictions. It was so blatant I wanted to laugh, but their confidence, their resources made it terrifying. They acted like they'd done this before, and suddenly I was wondering how many other people had been bullied, how many homes stolen by paperwork. That night I walked the cabin I'd built, touching walls and beams, reminding myself it was real. 30 days just like that, a stranger could show up and tell you to surrender your life's work. And the scariest part, they made it feel routine. Bureaucratic theft, dressed up with polite language and threats of legal action. I barely slept. The next week, I started calling every government office that might know something. The county clerk sent me to the Secretary of State, who sent me to Municipal Affairs, who bounced me back to the county. Round and round, every official telling me, "Not our department." By day 3, my notebook was full of names, numbers, and dead ends. There was no Blackberry Ridge HOA registered anywhere. On paper, Deborah Foster's organization didn't exist. But the people who showed up at my door were real. Their documents looked real, their confidence was real, and the sense of being hunted grew by the hour. Digging deeper, I found an old property dispute from 2018. Blackberry Ridge Development Corporation had tried and failed to claim mineral rights around here, dissolved in January 2020, right before the supposed HOA started up. Same office address, new name, classic shell game. I called Deborah directly, expecting to shake her up. "I know what you're running," I said. "I found your corporation's records. I know the scams." She barely paused. Our authority comes from current state statutes, Mr. Thompson. Any previous business activity is irrelevant." Her voice was almost amused. Before I could argue, she dropped the hammer. "Given your continued resistance, our board has accelerated your timeline. You now have 10 days to arrange property transfer or face immediate legal action." Just like that, my 30 days was cut to 10. I was outmaneuvered again, and I knew it. That afternoon, a woman named Tracy Williams came to my door claiming to be an attorney who'd handled cases just like mine. She showed me a tablet with supposedly similar victories. "Don't dig too deep. Mr. Thompson, let me handle the research. These people can be dangerous if provoked." I signed a retainer, mostly out of desperation, and let her take over. But 3 days later, she was gone, calls unanswered, case numbers fake. Tracy hadn't helped me. She'd been part of the scam, burning up the clock. I'd wasted my last days trusting the wrong person. After Tracy Williams vanished, and I realized I'd been played, a different kind of stubbornness took over. I stopped chasing fake leads and focused on what I could actually verify: my land, my boundaries, my records. I spent hours digging through every survey, every scrap of satellite imagery from the county assessor's office. There were subtle but crucial differences between my original survey and the digital maps the county had online, now boundary lines that had shifted, corner markers that had moved just enough to be noticed if you were looking for them. I started to see a pattern, one I couldn't unsee once I spotted it. The boundaries on at least 6 neighboring parcels had been shifted too, just enough to nudge a few acres here and there into some kind of ambiguous status. Someone was changing the official digital records, and the only way to pull that off was to have inside access or a contractor trusted by the county. A little more digging, and I found the source of the imagery: Redwood Development Corporation, a name that matched those old mineral rights records, except now they were the county's private satellite imaging contractor. And Redwood was big, huge, in fact. Land development projects all over the Midwest, specializing in swallowing up rural properties for housing developments and shopping centers. Suddenly, this wasn't about some local HOA flexing its muscles. It was about corporate expansion, and my land was in their way. Deborah Foster and her so-called HOA were just a front. Redwood was orchestrating everything: the phony documentation, the database manipulation, the shell companies, the legal runarounds, the sudden appearance of lawyers like Tracy Williams to keep people passive and confused. All classic tactics to get a property owner to give up without a fight. My case wasn't unique. I was just the latest obstacle in a long campaign. But understanding who I was really up against gave me a new kind of clarity. Corporate fraud, unlike one-off cons, left paper trails, regulatory vulnerabilities, and most importantly, potential allies. If Redwood was manipulating government records and orchestrating fraudulent claims, that was a crime with real teeth, especially if it involved federal authorities. So I went hunting for someone who could fight on that level, a real attorney, not some plant sent by the enemy. After a frantic stretch of phone calls and late-night research, I found Thomas Bradley, a property rights specialist in Kansas City. Bradley had a reputation for taking on big land grabs and winning. His voice, when I first got him on the phone, had a kind of measured calm I hadn't heard in weeks. I explained the situation. The moment I mentioned database manipulation and shell company fraud, he got serious. "If you can document this, Mr. Thompson, Redwood's exposure is massive. You're not just fighting for your property, you could bring down their whole operation." Together we built a case file. Digital timestamps, screenshots, satellite images, every shred of documentation about the manipulated boundaries. We found records of fraudulent filings, fake legal notices, and internal emails between county contractors and Redwood, enough to prove a pattern of systematic fraud. When we filed a federal complaint, the wheels started turning. Within 2 days, a judge granted us an emergency injunction. Redwood, Deborah, all of them were legally barred from taking action against my property until the court could investigate. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. But that hope lasted less than a day. The next morning, Bradley called, and I heard the tension in his voice before he even spoke. "They filed a response, and it's not what we expected. Redwood is claiming your land falls inside a federal conservation zone established through eminent domain years before your purchase. He emailed me the documents official with the right seals and signatures. If they were legitimate, it meant Redwood wasn't stealing my property for private development, but acting as an agent for a federal conservation project. And if that was true, I had no case. You can't fight the federal government on eminent domain, not without evidence of fraud or gross error. I was gutted. My title search hadn't shown anything about a conservation zone. Neither had any of my permit processes or tax records. But the paperwork was airtight. If it was real, Bradley said we had to withdraw our complaint or risk being sanctioned for a frivolous lawsuit. For 2 days, I paced my cabin angry and helpless. Redwood had outflanked me again. But as the numbness wore off, a few details started to nag at me. If my property was designated for federal conservation in 2018, months before I bought it, why did they need to survey it in 2024? Why the elaborate HOA charade, the intimidation, the manipulated records? I went back to the original federal maps and overlaid my GPS survey data from when I'd found those first orange flags. My property wasn't inside the conservation zone at all. The line was off by about 50 yards, enough that my cabin and most of my land were outside the official boundary. That was the break I needed. If Redwood was using legitimate federal documents to claim property outside the conservation zone, they weren't just scamming me, they were defrauding the federal government. That's a crime that gets prosecuted hard. I called Bradley in a rush, barely able to get the words out. The boundaries don't match, Thomas. My property is outside the federal zone. I've got GPS coordinates, survey photos, timestamps, everything. He paused, then let out a long, low whistle. If you can prove it, Redwood's not just facing civil penalties, they're looking at federal fraud charges. Let's get to work. We refiled our complaint, this time not as a property dispute, but as a case of systematic fraud against federal agencies. That same week, I got a call from Deborah Foster. She was setting up a public hearing complete with local media and residents to finalize the federal conservation transfer of my property. Transparency and community accountability, she said in that same smooth voice. You're not going to want cameras there, Deborah, I replied. Trust me. But she was so confident she wanted a spectacle, a warning to everyone else. I showed up at the community center the next morning, GPS device and federal boundary maps in hand. The setup looked like a trial Deborah at a table with 2 men in uniforms. 30 neighbors, 3 news crews, and a map on an easel showing my land in the middle of a big red box inside the conservation zone, supposedly. She started with a speech about environmental responsibility and federal authority, making it sound like I was some kind of obstacle to progress. She was about to open for questions when I stood up, walked to the front, and spread my maps next to hers. Your map is wrong, Deborah. The real federal boundary is here. My property's outside. The government has no authority over this land. The room went quiet. Reporters moved in close. Neighbors leaned forward. Deborah tried to brush it off. Survey methodology can differ, but the official federal documents didn't lie. I showed GPS data, survey reports, date stamp photos of the original property markers. Her federal authority evaporated in front of everyone. One of the men in uniform, federal or not, got up and quietly excused himself. Deborah tried to call the hearing back to order, but nobody was listening. Neighbors started asking questions about their own boundaries. The news crews realized they had a story, maybe the biggest local story of the year. I made it clear, this isn't just about me, this is about systematic fraud. If anyone here got a letter about federal conservation, you need to check your boundaries. The crowd was buzzing. A few people pulled out their own paperwork. Deborah was suddenly gathering her files in a hurry, the meeting unraveling. A TV reporter followed her out the door asking, "Do you have a comment on allegations of systematic federal fraud?" That night, the story was everywhere on TV and the papers all over social media. The county sheriff's office called to say federal investigators would be on site the next morning. By the next morning, the mood on Blackberry Ridge had changed. Instead of neighbors looking away or whispering about crazy lawsuits, folks were out by their mailboxes trading stories. The federal investigators didn't waste time. They showed up early, unmarked cars parking up and down the road, agents in windbreakers with notepads asking questions. They listened, they documented, and they took every bit of evidence I'd gathered, GPS data, surveys, photographs, like it was gold. Detective Ray Sullivan from the county sheriff's office stopped by my cabin just before lunch. He looked tired, but there was a glimmer in his eye the way a man gets when he knows something big is about to break. "Mr. Thompson, we're hearing from a lot of people. This goes way beyond you. We've got dozens of similar complaints, phony letters, sudden boundary shifts, threats of legal action. Even a few cases where folks almost handed over deeds out of pure fear." The more they dug, the deeper it went. The news started running features about Blackberry Ridge's HOA scam, but by that afternoon it was clear this was bigger, a multi-state land grab operation hiding behind shell HOAs and bogus federal claims. The feds confirmed that Redwood Development Corporation wasn't just trying to grab a few properties, they'd targeted hundreds across 3 states, doctoring records, inventing authorities, pushing scared people into surrender. And the thing was, the scam worked until someone pushed back hard enough. The official investigation moved at a pace only the government can manage, slow at first. Then once the paperwork caught up to the facts fast enough to feel like justice actually meant something. Within 2 weeks, charges were filed against Deborah Foster, fraud against federal agencies, systematic property fraud conspiracy, minimum sentences that meant she'd be gone a long time. Tracy Williams picked up 3 days later, charged with practicing law without a license, fraud, and conspiracy. She cut a deal and started naming names. And the biggest fish, Richard Blackstone, CEO of Redwood, was arrested in Chicago on federal racketeering charges. The media loved that footage, him in a suit, handcuffed, head down, as agents marched him out of a glass tower. But it wasn't just about retribution. The prosecutors moved to freeze every property they'd stolen, and all the evidence the class action lawyers needed came spilling out in court filings. Suddenly, all those fake boundaries, those HOA management districts, the endless intimidation and lies, they were evidence in a federal case that spanned state lines. I spent a lot of those weeks just in shock. The adrenaline had burned out, leaving me with this deep, jittery exhaustion. The cabin felt different too, no longer just a sanctuary, but the front line in a fight I'd never signed up for. I heard from neighbors, some I barely knew, thanking me for not backing down. The Miller family 2 miles south told me they'd almost signed their place away. The Hendersons up north found out their property was next on Redwood's list. The class action suit brought money enough to cover the lawyer bills and then some. But honestly, that wasn't what mattered most. What meant more was the knowledge that the fight mattered. My case set legal precedent, and property rights organizations started using it to educate landowners nationwide. County offices put up new signs explaining how to verify federal claims. State legislatures drafted bills to require clearer disclosures and better oversight for conservation zones. The government even sent me a letter official frame thanking me for defending the integrity of legitimate federal conservation efforts. That one hangs in my workshop next to photos of the day I broke ground. 6 months on spring, returned to Blackberry Ridge. The official surveyor's flags, real ones this time, marked out the actual conservation boundaries. My property and everyone else's had GPS coordinates carved in stone so nobody could pull the same trick again. On clear mornings, neighbors would stop by, mugs in hand, and talk about what happened, about how easy it is for paperwork and confidence to become a weapon. The cabin became something bigger than me, a symbol of stubborn resistance. I started getting mail letters from people in other states, even calls from journalists. The law journals ran articles about the case. Property rights groups used photos of my place in their workshops. One day I got a call from the Federal Conservation Agency itself. The director's assistant read a message thanking me for protecting public trust from corporate exploitation. It was surreal, my fight, which had started in anger and fear, now serving as a warning, a guide, and a promise that the system, for all its flaws, could still work if enough people cared to stand up. Sometimes I'd sit on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, look out over those 12 acres, and feel a kind of satisfaction I'd never known before. Not just for having built something with my own hands, but for having defended it. For having proved, at least to myself, that individual grit still counted for something in this world. That even when the odds are stacked and the enemy wears a suit and a smile, you can still win if you refuse to give up, if you dig in and hold your ground, if you believe what's right is worth fighting for. The oak tree I planted after the case settled is small now, just a sapling waving in the wind. But it'll grow. I think about that a lot, how some things take time, how roots run deep, how a man's word and work and will can outlast even the hardest storm. My victory was bigger than the headlines, bigger than the payout. It was the restoration of something simple and profound, the right to build, to keep, to belong. This land, this cabin, it's still mine. And after everything I know, it always will be. You know there's something nobody tells you about surviving a storm like this. When the noise dies down, when the suits and the news vans and the court summons finally disappear, what you're left with is silence. Not peaceful silence at first. It's this buzzing emptiness, like your whole body's waiting for another shoe to drop. Some nights I'd lie awake listening to the wind rattle the cabin walls and wonder, was it really over? Or had they just retreated, planning a new angle, a different loophole? But day by day, the world started to settle. The sun came back. The creek ran clear. Deer crossed my meadow like nothing had happened. Neighbors, folks I'd never spoken to before all this, would wave when they drove by. Some would stop at the gate and say thanks or ask for advice about their own deeds and documents. Turns out a lot of people live with a quiet fear that someone somewhere could just take what they built and nobody would ever stop them. I guess for a little while I became that somebody. And hell, it felt strange, me, the guy who just wanted to be left alone, suddenly the point man for property rights across 3 counties. But that's how it works sometimes, right? Life doesn't ask if you're ready. It just shoves you onto the front line and leaves you to figure it out. The media kept calling for a while. Some nights I'd see my own face in the background of a TV story, the cabin behind me used as an example for new bills being proposed in the State House. There was even a segment on one of those national news shows about the man who beat the corporate land grab. My phone would buzz with messages from distant relatives, old army buddies, college friends, folks I hadn't heard from in years. They all wanted to know the same thing. How'd you pull it off? What's your secret? Truth is, there was no secret. Just stubbornness and a refusal to back down when my gut said something was wrong. I tell people that sometimes the fight is won in the early moments, the ones nobody sees. The moment you decide you won't be intimidated. The moment you look at a fraudulent document and say, no, I know who I am and I know what's mine. But victory doesn't erase the scars. There were nights I'd walk the boundary at sunset, flashlight in hand, checking every marker, every fence post. I'd find myself replaying conversations in my head, what I should have said to Deborah, to Tracy, to the suits, who thought a clipboard and a smile could erase 5 years of labor. Sometimes I'd laugh at the absurdity of it. Sometimes I'd just shake my head and wonder how close I'd come to losing everything. In the workshop, the framed letter from the Federal Conservation Agency hangs right above my workbench. Next to it, I've started pinning up little mementos, photos of the cabin under construction, snapshots of the public, hearing a copy of the news article with my name spelled wrong in bold. There's even a handwritten thank you card from the Miller kids who drew my cabin in crayon and wrote, "Thank you for saving our home." Spring turned to summer, and the world outside my window kept moving. I fixed the fence line where the surveyors had trampled it. I replaced a cracked window in the kitchen, the one Tracy Williams' rental car had kicked a rock through when she tore out of here that afternoon. I even started a new project, a little greenhouse just off the south wall. I figured if I could defend a cabin from corporate thieves, I could probably manage to grow a few tomatoes. And all the while, the land healed. The tire tracks faded, the orange survey flags vanished, and the scars along the boundary were soon covered by wildflowers. The deer returned in greater numbers, birds nested in the eaves, and at dusk the only sound was wind in the trees and the slow, steady heartbeat of a place that had nearly been stolen. Neighbors kept coming more as months passed. Some needed advice on legal paperwork, others just wanted to hear the story from the man who lived it. A few were angry at the system, at the way nobody seemed to care until it was almost too late. But most were just grateful. And that gratitude, honestly, was humbling in a way I can't quite explain. I'd never set out to be an example for anybody. But every handshake, every thank you for not giving up reminded me that what started as my fight had become something bigger. I watched as the county, embarrassed by how easily they'd been manipulated, tightened their procedures. New laws were passed, new oversight boards formed, and even the local title companies started double-checking their records against federal and state databases. You could see the change everywhere in the way officials talked about conservation, in the new signs at the county office, in the wary questions folks asked when a stranger showed up with a clipboard. Looking back, I can see that none of it was inevitable. If I'd given up, if I'd ignored those survey flags or backed down at Deborah's first threat or trusted Tracy Williams a little longer, none of these changes would have happened. The fraud would have rolled on property by property, neighbor by neighbor, until there was nothing left of Blackberry Ridge but a few stories about the way it used to be. But I didn't give up. I didn't back down. And that made all the difference. There are still hard days. Some mornings I wake up before dawn, heart pounding, expecting the worst. Some nights a car will slow down on the gravel road and I'll tense up, waiting for someone to step out with a new set of threats. Maybe that'll never go away completely. But mostly there's peace, the kind you only earn by fighting for it. The oak tree I planted after it all ended is taller now. Not much, but enough to notice if you're paying attention. It's a reminder of the years I almost lost, of the people who tried to steal them, and of the stubborn refusal that saved them. I water it every week. I check its roots, its leaves, its steady growth. I like to think that by the time I'm old, it'll be the biggest tree on the ridge, a living witness to what happened here. I sit on my porch some evenings watching the sun sink behind the distant hills and let myself feel grateful for the fight, for the lesson, for the second chance to call this place home. I think of the old saying, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. But that's not quite right. Sometimes you don't know what you've got until you almost lose it. And you decide losing it just isn't an option. I built this cabin for myself, but I defended it for everyone who ever dreamed of a place to call their own. I fought because I had no other choice, and I won because I refused to believe that a piece of paper or a fancy seal meant more than blood, sweat, and memory. This is my land, this is my story, and for as long as I've got breath in my lungs, this is where I belong. Sometimes late at night when the ridge is quiet and the only thing moving is the wind, I catch myself replaying it all, every twist, every gut punch, every moment I almost threw in the towel. It's funny how the smallest details stick with you. The smell of wet earth the morning I found those survey flags, the sound of tires crunching up the drive, Deborah Foster's polished shoes leaving neat prints in the dust of my porch. Little things burned into memory as permanent as any scar. People like to ask what I'd say to someone in my shoes, someone facing down a system that seems rigged, who feels like the deck is stacked and the game's already lost. Sometimes they want some magic advice, a step-by-step manual for winning a fight you never wanted. But there isn't one. There's just you, your gut, and what you're willing to stand for. If I learned anything, it's that you don't have to be fearless. You just have to refuse to be run off your own land by people who don't even care what it means to you. After the dust settled, I started speaking at community meetings, not because I wanted attention, but because folks kept asking. I'd drive to a fire hall in a nearby county stand in front of a handful of worried families and lay it out straight. I told them how slick a scam can look when it comes with paperwork and official-sounding titles, how sometimes the very people who are supposed to protect you are the last to notice you're in trouble. I'd show them the documents, the old maps, even the photos from the public hearing where Deborah Foster's world came apart on live TV. One night, an older man with hands like gnarled roots grabbed my arm and whispered, "They tried that with me, son. Wanted to buy my field for pennies. Sent me letters, threatened to sue if I didn't sign." His voice shook not with fear, but with relief. I was about to give in, but then my grandson saw your story online. He said, "Grandpa, you fight. Don't let them take what you built." And I did. I told him to get lost. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't just about property lines or legal precedent or making some corporation pay up. It was about memory, about belonging, about families who'd poured their lives into a patch of earth, who saw every fence post and barn beam as proof they'd mattered, that their story was part of this country's story. I realized, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't just fighting for my land. I was fighting for every stubborn, hopeful soul who believes you shouldn't have to be a millionaire or a lawyer to keep what you've built. There were tough days, of course. The legal process dragged on with hearings and paperwork and interviews. Some of my neighbors, the ones whose lives had been upended by redwood schemes, still struggled. A few moved away too tired or too scared to rebuild, but most stuck it out. The Miller kids helped me plant a new row of apple trees along their fence so nobody ever gets lost again, they said, laughing a little too hard. The Hendersons brought over pie, and sometimes we'd sit on my porch and talk about nothing, weather fishing old TV shows, grateful for the simple fact that we still could. When the final court orders came down, there were cheers at the county office. Redwood's assets seized, their officers barred from land management anywhere in the state. Deborah Foster's name became a kind of cautionary joke, a reminder to double-check every letter, every legal threat, every too-good-to-be-true offer. I kept Bradley's card tacked above my desk just in case. That first autumn after the victory, the ridge exploded in color. Gold and red, the air sharp and full of promise. I built a fire in the old stone ring out back, invited everyone who'd stood by me for a potluck. We ate, we laughed, we remembered. No speeches, no toasts, just a bunch of tired but stubborn people who'd survived something together. And when the stars came out and the fire burned low, I stood a little apart and looked at my cabin. It wasn't the fanciest place, not even close, but every log, every nail, every shingle was a piece of me, proof that hard work and honest hands can still shape the world. In that moment, I knew deep down I'd do it all again if I had to. Some nights I still worry, not as often, but enough to keep me humble. Laws change. New scams pop up. The world keeps spinning, and folks keep looking for shortcuts. But now I know I can stand my ground, and so can you if you choose. So that's my story, not just of losing and winning, but of stubbornness and faith, of neighbors who became friends, of a home that became a rallying point for something bigger than itself. If you're listening to this, wondering if you should fight or fold, I'll tell you plain, don't let anyone talk you out of your birthright. Don't let a clipboard and a fancy letter scare you off your land. Get your facts straight, gather your people, and hold the line. And if you ever find yourself standing on your porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over a place you built with your own two hands, know that you're not alone. I'm right there with you in spirit, hoping you'll fight like hell and hang on tight. Because this is still America, and sometimes all it takes to win is to decide you're not backing down. After everything quieted down, life on Blackberry Ridge slipped into a new kind of normal. But it wasn't the same normal as before, not exactly. There was a layer of gratitude over every sunrise, every trip down the old gravel driveway, every simple chore. It's funny how 5 years of hard work can be nearly erased in a month by people you've never met, but also how one hard-won victory can change how you see your own life forever. The cabin still creaks in the wind. The roof still pings with rain, and sometimes when I'm splitting wood out back, I pause and look over my shoulder, half expecting to see those suits coming up the drive again. Old habits die hard. But there's a peace now, too stronger than before. I walk my boundaries boots, sinking into the loam, and I don't just see land anymore. I see stories. Every rock I dug out, every fence post I set, every time I stopped to rest my aching back and thought, this is mine. And I think that's what they never understood. Not Deborah Foster, not the lawyers, not the redwood suits. They thought it was about the dirt, the square footage, the timber, and the tax roll value. They never saw the long hours after sunset, the tools handed down from my father, the dreams I poured into every corner of this place. They never saw the storms I wrote out inside these walls, the Christmases by the wood stove, the letters from my sister tacked above the desk. That's what made me fight, not just for myself, but for the memory of the people who raised me, the promise I'd made to my grandfather the last time we fished down at the creek. I'll take care of it, Grandpa. I'll make you proud. Now, looking back, I see that's what saved me. That's what made all the difference. The law mattered, yes, and so did the paperwork and the right lawyer at the right moment. But none of that would have mattered if I hadn't been willing to dig in my heels to say, no, this is where I draw the line. You want this place, you better bring an army. I keep in touch with Bradley. He checks in every few months just to see how things are on the ridge. The first Christmas after everything ended, he sent a card, a photo of his family standing in front of a snowy porch with a note. For every cabin worth defending, there's a man behind it who won't give up. I keep that card too, right next to my framed federal letter. Sometimes I still get calls from strangers, people who found my story online or heard about it from a neighbor. They ask, can you help me? My land's being threatened. They say it's not really mine, and I always tell them what I learned the hard way. Get everything in writing. Check your boundaries yourself. Don't take anyone's word if your gut says something's wrong. And above all, don't let anyone intimidate you into walking away from what you've built. You'd be amazed what a single stubborn person can accomplish. One Saturday in early fall, the local school asked me to talk to the kids about community history and standing up for what's right. I didn't know what to say at first. I'm just a guy who builds things and tries to keep to myself. But I went sat in a too small chair in a bright classroom and told them about the day I realized this cabin, this land was worth any fight. I told them about good neighbors and bad actors, about what happens when people look the other way versus what happens when they stand up together. A little girl raised her hand at the end and asked, "Were you scared?" I nodded. Yeah, I was scared. That's how you know you're fighting for something that matters. Life keeps rolling. The seasons keep turning. The oak tree I planted gets a little taller every year. Sometimes at sunset, I stand under it and look out across the ridge, listening to the quiet. There are no more threats, no more strangers with clipboards, just the sounds of home, a dog barking somewhere down the hill, the creek bubbling in the hollow, the distant echo of a tractor. People forget sometimes that most American stories are quiet ones, told not with fireworks or headlines, but in the steady work of ordinary hands. We build, we lose, we fight, we keep going. And if we're lucky, we get to hold on to what matters most. So if you're still listening, wondering what to do when the world tries to take what's yours, here's my advice. Don't go it alone. Find your people. Speak up. Keep your records tight. And never ever let the threat of paperwork steal the heart from your story. Because sometimes the only thing standing between your home and the people who want to take it is you and the courage to say, not today, not ever, this is mine. And that, my friend, is a fight worth having.